Stephanie Miller is joined by Glenn Kirschner. Together, the two break down the latest with all the Trump trials and where they go from here.
You know, we talk about this all the time, that I understand a lot of, Allison Gill's, some of her defenses of Garland. I think you've been really impatient, as I've been. But, get your take on Amy Siskin said, Merrick Garland picked this Republican prosecutor who tried to damage Biden with this 300-page report despite his innocence. Again, Garland tries to appease. It never works. What is Merrick Garland's role? This is, first of all, he didn't have to release this. Now he's put Biden in a horrible position, as I said earlier. Biden can't fire him now, or it looks... But this is just egregious, isn't it, that he allowed this political Fox script to be released?
Yeah, he didn't have to release it. If he did, he could have redacted it to take unfair commentary out of it. Listen, and I understand that sometimes you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. But if that is the case, then just don't do the wrong thing. Do the right thing. And it seems by default, he is forever doing the wrong thing. And it may be born of good intentions. I don't want to be perceived as political. But what you're doing ultimately is political, because you are, doing the wrong thing with respect to a particular candidate. That's wrong.
Yeah. Well, in the middle of an election year, isn't that supposed to be the whole thing the DOJ avoids? In an election year, you're speculating about, as if you're a doctor, about Biden's age or what the jury might think, or all of that's irrelevant. And also, Glenn, can we just talk about the findings? One page it says willfully retained, another page it says no evidence he willfully retained. this just strikes me as a total piece of garbage, this report.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hot mess. There are some inconsistencies. There's some gratuitous commentary that's not only unfair, but maybe inaccurate, because her interprets things one way. And guess what? He's not necessarily right. On the willful retention, you can say, OK, well, there's some indication he knew he had some classified documents back in 2018 or whatever the original year was. So I think you can appropriately talk about his retention of those documents, but just because it was willful doesn't mean that there was criminal intent that went along with it. And let me tell you, Steph, this is no defense of the many people who took with them classified information, whether advertently, inadvertently, knowingly, unknowingly, when they left decades of government service. But I would say back then, it was something of a different time. People may have taken notes in their capacity as a government official, and those notes included some classified information. And they weren't taking it with them to use it nefariously, to hold it hostage, to sell it to foreign actors. They didn't then retain it when the National Archives, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and a federal grand jury came a-calling saying, giving it back. These things really are like night and day. And attaching the words classified information to all circumstances and concluding that they all involve the same conduct and the same intent just does a disservice to the whole process.
And, once again, Glenn, let's talk about the media for a minute. Our friend Angelo Carasone said the media is going to, of course, completely mess up the reporting here. But one big thing the media won't but should note, a report like this written by a counsel from the opposing party would not see the light of day in a Trump administration, let alone even exist in the first place. So we get bitten by trying to be the good guys all the time, by trying to be overwhelmingly fair and transparent, right?
Well, Steph, would Bill Barr or any Trump-appointed attorney general appoint as special counsel a Democrat to look into the misconduct of Donald Trump? Of course not. They would have, ensured the outcome with the appointment. That's what the Bill Barrs and the Donald Trumps of the world do, right? So all I can say is this is a bad look for a lot of reasons, but I do believe it will be yesterday's news. And I think more importantly, it should be yesterday's news, because the top line takeaway is that Joe Biden did nothing criminal. Joe Biden did nothing that approaches what Donald Trump did and continues to do in the classified documents arena and in undermining our confidence in American elections So we will put this behind us.
Yeah, I think it is. You're right. It triggers our 2016 PTSD that you're like, how is this allowed to happen? You don't even have to be a lawyer to go. You either say charging, not charging. You don't go, but here's how I feel about that. And here's some of my, opinions. It's just that it's not the way the law is supposed to work.
It hurts all the more because it comes on top of yesterday's Supreme Court argument.
Yeah,
right?
Let's talk about that because that obviously got overshadowed.
Yeah.
I thought Chris Hayes made the same point on Twitter that I've been making. He said, "Oh wow, look who's suddenly very skeptical of states' rights and the power to regulate their own elections. The court's conservatives." I mean, and you pointed out to see Clarence Thomas sitting there. Chris Hayes also said, "Boy, the conservative justices sure didn't want to talk about January 6th." And you said, I want to see a judicial conflict. If Clarence Thomas participates, which he did, obviously, in Trump's disqualification, if he rules what happened on 1/6 was an insurrection, that will further incriminate his wife, who may have assisted it. That's an actual conflict, right? I mean, yesterday between this news and watching hearing Clarence Thomas just made me crazy. I mean, talk about your impressions of the Supreme Court yesterday.
Yeah, there was so much about that Supreme Court argument that upset me and that made me crazy. One is the states' rights angle. I couldn't believe that the justices had the gall to mention that if they allow the states to run their elections, as the Constitution provides they can, and they allow states to qualify and disqualify candidates, as the Constitution allows they can, there will be what? Inconsistency among the states. One of the justices said inconsistency bordering on chaos. Well, excuse me, a little over a year ago, you revoked women's constitutional privacy rights to make their own reproductive health decisions. You threw it to the 50 states, and what do we have? Massive inconsistency. Indeed, inconsistency bordering on deadly chaos, like down in Texas with what they're doing to women. But nobody gave a hoot about inconsistency back then. But when it comes to keeping Donald Trump on the ballot, we're all concerned with the states doing it differently as the Constitution provides they can and they must. This is hypocrisy run wild.